it's interesting thinking about how when I was at art school, I was purposefully not documenting some works, and then, then thinking about what that means and how that can exist in the real sort of art world. Weirdly and ironically, you need to then document it in order to at least
have proof as well. Prove that there was some magic.
Yeah. This can do this thing, and here's at least the one record of it. It's kind of fleeting in a sense.
There's a cosmic mortality to it. There's all of this chaos and all of this waiting for the moment where you go, "Oh, that was beautiful." We live in that moment day to day of, whoa. Well, everything has aligned perfectly to a point of where we get to look at it and be aware of its improbability and also its beauty. And no wonder we're compelled to grab a piece of paper, grab some paints, grab a recording device, not even grab, invent ways to keep them forever.
I've tried to even subconsciously distill our existence, in a point, just scale down so I can see it. How weird, how crazy is that?
If I can sit here with absolutely no understanding of what it is that you've done and see our whole existence in it, you're doing something right. So fucking hats off to you, bro.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming to sit with me and talk to me
today.
Oh
man, it's such a pleasure. It's nice to be here.
Like I was saying to you earlier, I stumbled on your Instagram and just saw the level of tinkering that you dedicate yourself to, and I was just blown away by all of these contraptions that you made. It was some wild science, and I was like, all right, I need to get a little light and shine it on this fucking wild perspective that's going on.
Thanks.
So thanks for obliging me in that.
Oh, no problem.
First question I ask everyone who comes and sits in front of me, man. What is art?
You know what, that's such a difficult one, because I've thought of this, I've thought of this before, and I think about it actually kind of regularly, because I like sort of seeing things and spotting things just in the everyday, and to me so many things sort of jump out and pop out and sort of catch my attention because I kind of see it as art, in quotation marks. And it's funny because there's that thing of, is it art if it wasn't made by someone? There's that kind of question. And I studied fine art, so there's...
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
So I love that stuff. I guess I think about it all the time. And
so how do you identify it then? Which is, I guess, seems to be the conflict with you. There's this naturalist, everything is art, but then also there's this part of you that's well, there's an intention to it that might make it important.
Yeah, exactly, because there's that perspective of, if an artist makes something, it will be or it can be art. And that seems quite sort of simple. But that's the thing, what about something that isn't first made by an artist, but then it might have been sort of accidentally made by nature. But it's that thing of, are we the only species that can appreciate that kind of thing, because there's so many sort of beautiful things and phenomenon and occurrences in nature, for example, that we're sort of taken back by or blown away by, and it's wait, but is that because we're humans? And we can think about it and process it as art. So it's such a confusing one. I'm not really sure how to describe art, really.
That's why I have a podcast with hours and hours of conversations of us just trying to get a handle on it.
Yeah.
And it's a very valid conversation in a sense of, does it have to have some kind of intention behind it? Does it have to be wrapped up in some kind of message? Nature, in a naturalist sense, isn't expressing anything other than its own simplicity and its own beauty. Whereas ours, human art, intentional art, is only expressing or is trying to take away everything that distracts from that.
Right. Yeah.
In my experience anyway. You know, anything that isn't our natural beauty,
Sure.
we in the best art we try to strip away.
Yeah.
And you know, and maybe even give some kind of map of how to do that for every individual, or at least provide a space where other people see that it's actually possible. So for me, it's I have the same conflict as you. You know,
you know what's interesting is that, or you know, at least for me, I think I'm glad that that's such a sort of powerful question, or even a profound one, because it's something to sort of chew on forever. You know, and it's beautiful just to imagine how we might actually come to different answers over maybe, you know, like different parts of our lives and stuff. I certainly think about art so differently than when I was doing GCSEs, you know, for example.
The study of fine art has really confused me because it's beyond academia.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a spiritual exercise.
Yeah, for sure.
So how for you, as someone who's got a degree in it and has been through that machine essentially,
Yeah, definitely.
how do you reconcile that? It's almost a spiritual endeavor. How do you reconcile that academic pursuit of it?
It was kind of that sort of curiosity of, you know, sort of questioning, you know, how can you teach or study and grade art, right? But it was also there was that curiosity in me that wanted to sort of, you know, go ahead with it or go through that sort of journey to still like critique it, like from the sort of inside. You know?
Critique the institution of it.
and you know the idea, the sort of the path of, you know, like the academic artist, for example. You know, I thought it would be interesting to do it and then to experience that and then see like what, you know, how does this work, and I, you know, I feel like it was interesting because as I began sort of getting into you know, the sort of conceptual art stuff that, you know, I hadn't really, I guess, dug into before the degree, you know, I was like fascinated by some of these sort of works and some of these artists that, you know, how rebellious, I suppose, they were. It's really difficult to be shocked, you know, by many things. But, you know, you can imagine when an artist like Marcel Duchamp like had this urinal, you know, that wasn't even created by him. You know, it was a sort of a mass-produced
straight
item.
off the factory line.
You know, like it was super clean and sort of, I guess, unused. And
you know, they dropped it. They dropped it on the installation. They thought that he would go crazy, and he was like, "Perfect, now it's finished."
No.
Yeah.
Really?
He said, "Now it's complete."
No.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, like, you know, like you can imagine when that was presented as such a new idea. You know, people were obviously just going sort of like mental, and they were like furious, and but it was amazing because, you know, for me, like it sort of it kind of said that it was okay to actually focus on an idea, and you know, it sort of it kind of showed me, I think, that the idea is almost like sometimes probably more important than, you know, the outcome, you know, in that sort of context, because like it's almost like that's where it all begins anyway. You know, like you need, you know, you need the good idea. Right?
Yeah.
I then, you know, kind of inherited some of that rebelliousness, and I was interested in stuff like, you know, not documenting my work and, you know, seeing how that could work, and, you know, sort of like have, you know, sort of performing these sort of like time-based works that
In the moment.
yeah, you know, that I'd sort of, you know, record them not visually, you know, so I wouldn't sort of record them like video or take photos, but, you know, I'd sort of log just bits of information about them, like time and stuff. But, you know, I was really interested in trying to challenge this idea of, you know, how, for example, how can, you know, art be sold if it, you know, if it's not sort of recorded or commodified, you know, and how are we here? How are these lecturers marking us? And
Yeah.
you know, it was really interesting because you'd have these one-on-one sort of sessions where you'd be given feedback on stuff you'd made, and there'd be different sort of lecturers who maybe would have preferred your work and some who didn't. But it was really interesting how sometimes it's sort of dished out in a certain way, and then you remember like, wait, like this is literally one person. It's not even like they're representative of this.
It's not even a board. It's not even a democratic process, where it's aggregated opinion.
Yeah, definitely not. Even if it was, right, it's really interesting. Say there were like 10 people on this sort of like panel. It's still like 10 people, right?
Yeah.
Like individuals with their own opinion, I suppose, and that was a really interesting thing to play with. And this degree show also is made up to be such a big thing, and everything culminates to it, and sort of I guess leads up to it. But then you're just like, wait, but if anything, as an artist, that's probably the beginning of your sort of artistic career, as opposed to what seems like it's going to be this big sort of ending and this crescendo. And then like I became not really that sort of bothered by it. But the thing is, we had to make work.
What was your final piece?
It was originally going to be this sort of it was this heart, right? So it was a real heart, but it was a pig's heart. And so I was like playing around with it. I was trying to animate it and sort of get it moving, and I wanted it to sort of just be quite I don't know, gross and visceral. And I had it in one of those like metal like dentist balls, kind of really medical and sort of like super clean, and it was in like a pool of like blood, right? So I was playing around with all this stuff, and it was like, and it was gross in the sort of like weeks coming up to this. And then I'd found a way to sort of make it vibrate, right? So I was like playing around with all this kind of thing, and I guess I was leading up to present this, and about 2 weeks maybe before it, they were like, "Oh, look, you can't do this," because I guess because I hadn't really communicated much with them, because again, I feel like I didn't need to, right? Because if if it was my thing, it's not like I needed permission.
It's an art show, yeah. You know what I mean?
Exactly
what you said. Who needs permission? The fact that someone says you can't do something, if you're to get an A+ or first or whatever, you have to do what they say you can't.
You know what? And that was really interesting, because they were sort of bringing up the health and safety thing with, because they were kind of saying, oh, look, like it might attract flies, and, unless you sort of replace the heart every day, this, and they were, I guess they weren't happy with it. And it was interesting because there was this other thing of it interfering, I suppose, with other people in a sense, because it was a group show. But that was something that seemed kind of, I don't know, I liked that kind of cheekiness about it, that, it's not, I guess, up to me to consider other, say if you're an artist like existing just in the real world, I guess you should be making art that, that's for you, or like, about you. And I guess, your sort of creative, like, expressive energy should be the main concern in a way, or the priority.
Or your truth.
Exactly.
The truth that you wish to express should take precedent over everyone else.
Exactly.
There has to be a self-importance to it, because if you can't get behind it, then what's the point?
Exactly. And it's not even in a sort of selfish way, but it's like, it's sort of beyond that, because it's like, this is what I want to present. And so anyway, they pretty much didn't sort of let me do it, and I wasn't sort of able to do it. So I got sort of really annoyed, and then I just ended up presenting loads of huge plants, right? Like massive, so we can like sort of couple feet high, and a load of them I grabbed from my parents' house in like Twickenham, so I had to like chuck them in a van, and it looked great, but like at that time I was sort of very, I didn't really know, I guess, what to do in a sense, because I felt like, well, everything that I had been leading up to and sort of like pursuing I guess, wasn't really going to be allowed to be shown.
I was just thinking of someone coming to Joseph Baez with a fucking risk assessment when he did America Hates Me, Loves Me, or whatever the piece is called. He's like, well, there is going to be a hyena in there,
hilarious.
and it might have rabies, so it's really unsafe for you, Joseph.
So good. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to then show something that almost like doesn't have a meaning. You know, there wasn't like a purpose to it. And you know, again, it's just that funny thing of how you can sort of show anything now, I guess, because of people that were sort of brave enough to pioneer, you know, the craziest things like decades ago, when there was just like paintings in frames and stuff.
Well, do you think that served us though in our journey towards total harmony with the spirit? Do you think that the ability to stick a toilet in the middle of a gallery and put a signature on it and go voila, you know, do you think that has served us in our mission? If our mission is like you wanted to do in your art degree was to tell the truth.
You know, no doubt. I think that kind of thing was so influential because it presented this, you know, notion of like, you know, the idea is important, and it's almost like, you know, if that idea makes us think about something that is sort of equally, you know, as valid as, you know, like a classical painting, you know, from a sort of master painting kind of thing, because I guess they both do the same thing.
So I wrestle with my gratitude for postmodernism, because I subscribe to the idea that everything is important. I subscribe to the idea that even nonsense, the knowledge of nonsense, will drive us towards some kind of sense. And I do wrestle with the postmodernists. And I do think it's very necessary that we get out of that phase. You know, so we've got into... We've learnt what we need to learn from it, but then you kind of look at the way the world goes and you realise that we're hungry. We're in a drought of meaning, a drought of substance. And I think it's beautiful that those group of artists allowed us to look at a plant, look at nature, even look at the kitschy creations of man and look at everything as wonderful. But simultaneously, that creates an opportunity for everyone to look at everything as meaningless. And for me, that creates a disturbance that I'm starting to see in art now as needing to be reconciled.
You know, and it might, that, I guess, you know, that sort of, that history might have been necessary and have had to be so extreme for us to then finally, you know, sort of recoil and you know, I guess, sort of somehow, you know, go back to, or like, you know, minimize or sort of, you know, reduce or, try and like detox somehow, you know, to like the essentials and like the, you know, the basics and the natural.
Well, a detox to essence is like, that's a revelatory. You want to talk about Duchamp and radical ideas. The idea of essence in this day and age is ridiculously radical. That you start introducing essence into the social equation, you bring down the whole structure. You bring absolutely everything down, and it's not something that the way we live can come back from. And it's something that the conversation's starting to go that way, you know, because of global crises and humanitarian failures. But I mean, I want that conversation, but I completely understand why people get a whiff of it and run from it, because it's destructive in the most constructive way possible.
Exactly.
Introducing the idea of essence back into reality.
It's so like confrontational in a way. I guess maybe because, you know, as a sort of consuming society, I feel like, you know, maybe subconsciously we have that guilt. We know, I suppose, I feel like, for us as, spiritual beings, we can feel, I suppose, something isn't right, even if it's something that's so sort of subtle. And I guess there's that kind of weird escapism or numbness that we can get from, the way that most of us may live our lives. I feel like, everyone surely, I think, wants to sort of detox and, find meaning again, because that seems so integral and, such a sort of core, philosophy. And, you would hope that we come round to sort of connecting with that again. It's just hard to know, I suppose, how long
how long it'll take. So how does that quest for meaning manifest itself in your own creations? One could look at your work and see the chaos in it, see the randomity in it, and see a contradiction in that statement.
It's odd because I guess as an artist or as someone who creates, it's I guess it's even just in the word that you're going to be outputting something, or you're going to be manifesting something
out of nothing.
Yeah. So it is odd to think. Wait, in one sense, I'm adding. I'm adding to the noise. But the thing, I think, with the physical sort of music I make, it certainly doesn't seem like necessary or sort of vital that it needs to sort of exist in in these sort of physical forms. But I guess that comes from this sort of unending curiosity to try and make a device do something it can't, or try and make it break, but in a different way, and turn it inside out, or and it's this sort of like this quest of sort of trying to understand electronics in some sense without having studied it. But so it's great, especially when like so many other musicians, especially when you spend a lot of time on a computer or on sort of a laptop, and you can make work in that way. So it was nice to then almost like go back to this thing of actually going away from the computer and making noise with your hands, like dealing with an object, or sort of investigating an object, its materials, its form. And again, undoubtedly that came from me studying fine art, because even though I didn't do anything traditional like painting or anything, I got so much more out of it. I learned or gathered so many more ideas that has kept me going for like all that time since.
It's interesting. It's making me realize that art is the exploration of the relationships between things. That's all electronics is. You have a current, a voltage, or whatever, and you have a destination. So in that relationship between those two things, you might create a frequency or whatever, And then, all right, that relationship is established. Now, what happens if I add this into the relationship? How does that affect that initial relationship? And even when I think about if I sit down at the piano to write a song, I press a key and I go, all right, well, that in its isolation is that. How does that relate to this? And even in fine art, there's the at the most primitive level, at the most physical level, it's the relationship between colors and space, you know, composition. But then as you start to build the layers up, it's how does that physical reality relate to a spiritual reality? And then you just keep stacking the relationships. And then I guess postmodernism adds in the self-awareness, the self-referentialism into that relationship. Well, how can I have a primitive awareness with a spiritual awareness and then a practical self-awareness, and you get postmodernism? So then, you know, what do we add in or take away, you know? I'm certain in your circuitry, it's just as important what you take away. I just got a Juno 6 and I'm starting to learn, you know, it's not just about putting the faders up. It's about what can you put up and then create space to take away afterwards.
But you know what? What's interesting about that is, you know, literally the type of synthesis is called subtractive, right? Which is incredible and so perfect because it's that type of, I guess, making a sound where you start with a tone, right? Or even say, I guess before that, just a waveform that, you know, the synth will generate. And what's really interesting is you have all these other tools after it, like the filter and the envelope. And especially with the filter, you're taking away, which is really interesting because sure, like you can boost frequencies with it, but generally, it's really interesting how we were talking about this, and you know that synthesizer you have here is, you know, works by subtracting. You know, and for example, you know, contrarily, there's additive synthesis, which is obviously where you add on, you know, you sort of stack oscillators, and then so many other types. But it's great how one of the most, you know, the most popular style is subtractive, and you know, I guess that seems to just be, you know, or it could be or should be a lesson for so many other things, you know, this idea of taking away.
Yeah, it's a spiritual, I feel like most religions are built on the idea of reality being a subtractive experience. You know, you have the glory and grace of God in every religion, and then some kind of separation, some kind of fall, maybe in the Western religions. I guess even in my experience of like Sufi religion, that's like the closest one I subscribe to anyway. It's there's this separation which creates a longing, and that space in between is subtractive because, you know, us on this side of reality is less than the glory and power of whatever God represents. You know, maybe actually this is an additive experience. You know, maybe this is building on the pure frequency that permeates. Maybe this is an additive. Maybe we are the oscillators. We are the additions. We are the expansions and the expressions. Because I guess it's an interesting thing to think about. Expressionism, it seems like an adding word.
Yeah, sure.
Like a multiplier,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Because
it's cumulative as well.
Yeah, cumulative. So I wonder in language if there's what do you call a subtractive expression?
Wow.
I don't know, but that feels like, because I do feel there's something in that our expression is guided for whatever reason towards reductionism, towards essentialism, to take away all of this stuff and get back to the purity. And I wonder if there's a way to flip it in the time to come of how to build on it.
Perhaps, you're either subtracting maybe certain layers or, you know, preconceptions, I guess, that you may have, or, you know, like certain formattings like that, I guess you might have like learned and stuff to then get down to this like core essential. Whereas on the other hand, you could think of it as maybe we're all, you know, sort of we begin as this default kind of state, and we're sort of equal, and you know everyone's sort of the same, I suppose, like universally, and then, you know, throughout our lives, it becomes an additive thing where, you know, through, you know, like nature and then nurture, I suppose, even more so, you know, and all these influences and I guess, you know, like your upbringing and stuff, you know, then we start becoming who we are, and, you know, we sort of form our characters.
Deprogramming, essentially, getting away all of the clutter, getting away all of the experience, removing it all, and getting a look at yourself first and foremost, and then being like, all right, well, I've done that subtractive experience now it's time to multiply. Now it's time to create, which is it's revelatory for me. You know, the idea of going backward in societal terms and in just the general perception is that that's a negative thing. You know, but it's not until you actually go back, undo what you thought was hard work, undo what you thought was growth, and get to look at it all and go, all right, I'm going to head in a true direction, even if it's in the same direction that I've been going. It's the principle in the Alchemist book, you know, you does that whole experience just to realize that the treasure was underneath where he dreamt of the journey, you know, and it's...
Yeah,
I wish that for everybody, you know, the courage to go back, the courage to return from where they started. Like for you, how did your creative pursuit first manifest itself?
I lived in Sri Lanka till I was 10, right? So I came to London, and I was in maybe one or two like primary schools, and then you know, you start your secondary year stuff. But that's the thing, like, you know, certainly there was no sort of, you know, explicit exposure to sort of, you know, visual art when I was in Sri Lanka. You know, of course there are like the fine arts and the sort of, you know, the cultural arts there that are really, you know, quite rich, but I guess I would have just sort of absorbed them just kind of, you know, quite generally, as with everything else. And, you know, I'm trying to think at what point there would have been like this, you know, this spark, or, you know, the beginning of a sort of flame to do with like the curiosity for that stuff. But it's really hard to pinpoint because, again, it wasn't like a thing that had run in the family either. If you get to like study or fine art, or you know, get to like, you know, do it in a sense, you're really lucky, because it means somehow you've been able to you know, escape, I suppose, the you know, like the routine that seems like almost that's like predestined, or, you know, this kind of the inevitable like sort of city like rat race, and, you know, the formula, you know, that seems so prescribed. You know, you do a good subject, you get a degree in it, you get a good job, and then it's like all these like future steps are laid out. You know, you find a partner, you get married, and you have kids. You know, you have a house and have a car and stuff like that. And you know, I think, like, you know, I'm not gonna, I guess, forget how grateful I am, I think, to be outside of that. You know,
my housemate's from South Africa. He lived in South Africa for the first 20 years of his life, then moved here when he was like 21. And his whole family moved here. And it's something that I'll bring this full circle back to you in a second, but I'm still thinking in the subtractive way. He comes here, and the things he misses is his own primal nature. He not resents, but he sees the blinders that comfort and security brings. And I wonder if you moving as a child from a quote unquote more privileged, from a quote unquote more primitive way of life into a more industrial, quote unquote civilized. I don't know what the right word is, but in that sense, there is we are not primitive creatures here. You know, we are formulaic. There's no instinct. It's very external.
Yeah, quite robotic.
And it's maybe it's that void that subtractive experience had for you is like, that's what created the longing. You know, growing up and having your formulative years and not knowing anything other than a primitive way of being, you know, survivalism and that being the focus, and then coming here and being afforded comfort and security and almost fate in a sense and reassurance, and being like, well, hang on, something's lost here. There's a certain level of uncertainty, there's a certain level of chaos that I miss.
It doesn't even feel like I had these, like, you know, first 10 years living, you know, in a much like more simple place where, you know, things were slower. You know, it was like this like perfect sort of like paradise island, you know. There were like beautiful weather and like beautiful, you know, wildlife and food and stuff like that. And it's weird because I don't remember feeling a longing for that, and I don't feel weirdly that I missed it. You know, I think because those years just seemed so important in the sort of like, you know, building of your character. You know, those early sort of teens. You know, you begin to sort of understand who you are. You know, I guess you start making like real sort of, you know, adult decisions for the first time and stuff. And I guess this being my environment and stuff, I think I just got locked into the kind of, you know, this mentality, this sort of like city life and, you know, the aspirations, I suppose. Luckily, I managed to sort of break away from or like jump out of that kind of conveyor belt, you know, that was otherwise going to end up being quite like robotic and, you know, systematic.
If I were to make propaganda for Western civilization or any cosmopolitan city, it would center around the idea of like, here we control chaos. That would be my essential statement, you know. And I feel like my experience with what you've created, my minimal experience and this very abstract experience of just experiencing it through Instagram, this encouragement of chaos, of allowing a machine to make its own music, you know, to have no certainty, to have no control, to create the conditions where something can happen and let it be whatever it is. That suggests to me like your antidote to that control of chaos. It's the suffocation of chaos that I see as inspiring your art. Which is what that's why it makes it so interesting to me that it's very rare to literally see someone create and embrace chaos and sit and observe it and love it and enjoy it.
After the album in 2015, I didn't make that much sort of recorded music, but then I was doing a lot of music for like theatre and sort of dances and stuff like that, with like venues, and then so it's one of those two weird things where because of that I was spending less time on releasing music. I guess because of that circumstance I got into this kind of more experimental kind of, you know, like instrument building practice, or, you know, modifying and hacking kind of thing. But it's, you know, what's interesting is that I've liked that stuff forever anyway. I mean, I've been into the kind of really sort of DIY and self-built kind of like scene for a long time. It's interesting because now, I enjoyed this kind of experimental sort of sound art thing so much, and finally there are platforms for it. I'm able to sort of show it or display or demonstrate it in places, and perform it and talk about it, which is great because I wasn't able to do that before, but it's kind of just this unfortunate sort of turn of events that I had to maybe leave those other things for a while in order for this to finally sort of manifest.
You posted something on your Instagram about, it was like I think it might have been a physicist, and he'd correlated like all of these chemical components and lined them up with like emotions.
That image sort of map thing, by this amazing American musician, and he's an instrument maker as well. It's really strange. Well, I guess he sort of like champions this like really strange sort of like tuning system, right? And he's obviously got a sort of crazy brain, but he's called Bill Wesley. He wanted to sort of visualize this kind of like map of working out what he thought some of these emotions were according to frequency and stuff like that.
The thing that I wanted to understand about it is the relationships between all of the different layers that he was expressing. How are we correlating joy with chemical compounds or elements? How are we finding something similar, quantifiably something similar in emotions and colors, or emotions in compounds, or emotions with what was some of the other stuff? And
I mean, there's that interesting, I guess, like studies people have done with music and sort of colors, and that's really interesting because that seems like that's been something that's been explored for a long time, because maybe it seems really I guess those two things seem to just present itself as really like wanting to sort of meet in some sense. And like it's funny though, because again, I guess even everything we've seen so far, even all the different sort of studies and stuff, there's definitely no I guess it's not based on any like fact, because again, I mean, we're talking about connecting, the kind of red to a certain like sound, or even like musical like feeling. But what's really interesting about that is how that is just such a personal sort of and unique, I guess, sort of subjective. Like,
but isn't it dealing with the objective nature of music and color? It's the analysis of frequency and how that's so. An A is just a division of a pure tone.
Yeah.
And color is just an expression of white or black. It's the relationship between the two things.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily subjective. It's about the objective nature of these relationships. Someone might hear an A and be like, oh, that makes me feel blue or whatever.
Yeah.
But scientifically, these people are trying to go, well, actually, if A is 440 hertz, and the color red is 440 hertz, and then scientifically and objectively, those two are the same language. That's what blows me away, is that everything exists on a frequency spectrum.
Yeah.
Everything emits a certain frequency or is expressed through frequency, and it's just getting the correlation between all of the dimensions.
Yeah.
That's the thing that blows me away.
Yeah, exactly. That's the weird thing then, that all the different types of people who have their own, I guess, versions of it have tried to then draw these lines and connect these two, like, I guess, weirdly, like there's, those two sort of like like entities are so sort of different, yet it feels like, or at least, I guess maybe, we want to find a commonality or pattern there, so we're trying to bring them two together. And it's interesting because people with that
Synesthesia.
yeah, that condition, I mean, it's funny because again for them, as far as I know, I'm not sure if there's even anything universal, I suppose, with...
Yeah, that's a really good question. Is there a commonality?
Yeah, with...
Does everyone with synesthesia hear B flat and C orange?
Exactly. I mean, I'm gonna just assume no.
Yeah.
And then it's really just... It's just funny because then it means, again, it's like all these just different possibilities that people are kind of suggesting.
It's interesting, the idea of like, if you were to follow one of these color frequencies to music charts, that you could essentially paint a picture with music, and simultaneously you could write a song with a painting.
Yeah, definitely.
You could get your key, which is the color of the canvas, and you can start to build your embellishments. But it's interesting that the difference between painting and music is that music exists in time and space, whereas painting and fine art, even sculpture, which takes up space, exists outside of that. And the same with a photograph. It transcends out of time and space. It becomes its world in itself. So it's trying to find the middle ground of like, well, how does a music become still, stationary? And how does a sculpture, or how does something that's stuck get movement?
That's quite an interesting one, how then it gets to exist in a much more sort of organic and abstract way, as like outside of that gallery space. It exists in thought somehow. And then I guess in that way, like it gets to then become more like music somehow, because it doesn't seem to be so like locked in and to its like physical space, and that's really crazy one.
It's similar to to your mission in art, I guess, which is to... I haven't quite defined it concisely, but there's something to do with the experience. In fine art, there is the experience. The painting doesn't necessarily, or the sculpture or whatever, doesn't necessarily have its own experience. It doesn't have... Its experience is lived vicariously through you. But then music is a life force in and of itself. It's something that... It's a vehicle that you can get in and it will take you somewhere. Whereas the fine art gets into you and lives through you, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, should I get one of the things?
Oh, shit, yeah, of course.
So yeah, this is one of the tape. But I mean, essentially, so it's just a tape player that it's one of these weird like Chinese made devices that it's for learning languages, right?
Okay.
So it's got a built-in sampler.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is just so crazy. But anyway, let me just put the battery back in. And obviously, when I came across it, I went wild because I was like, first, wait, like...
Fucking, you need about 20 quid just to get the batteries in there. Jesus Christ, there's 6 AA's.
Every time it records a loop, the tape stops just so that it plays, but plays the loop back. But I sort of just added this switch to the side so that when you record, it doesn't stop playing. The tape doesn't stop playing. So then if
feeds back into itself.
Yeah, so if you record... Oh, because there's a tape loop in there, right? So if you record the entire tape loop length into the sampler, they both start playing at the same time. So then...
Oh, wow.
So I have to show you what...
You have to.
So I've recorded the loop into the sampler, but it's still playing from the tape. So now... Like, you get that really beautiful thing where... Because of the inconsistencies between the lengths, they start overlapping. And now it will never repeat in the same pattern.
Oh, okay.
You know, so it's that kind of like thing we've mentioned loads of times of like that, the chaos, but you know, it's not controlling it, but it's trying to, you know, it's trying to like just get some grasp of it. It's such a sort of simple like device. You're able to create something that's almost like never ending.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like infinitely repeats.
Do you ever get the urge to try and control it in a sense of you hear a bit of magic and you're like, oh fuck, I wish I could lock into that moment over and over and over again? Because obviously this is about the experience for you. It's about the unfolding of infinite possibilities. But then when something happens that's so serendipitous and so magical, do you never get the sense of, oh, I wish that could live forever. I wish that.
No, definitely. That's the thing. I think I've begun getting used to some of that, because with a lot of these objects, you know, it's really hard to repeat things, and you know, being like such a perfectionist with some things, like that's the worst, right? Especially, you know, if you like having control over the things you want to, like this. Sort of uncertainty and inconsistency, and certainly like random, you know, real random element to the events. It's difficult to work with, but then you realize, you know what, that is like completely its essence, right? And that's like the charm and the magic of it. And you realize like, wait, you know, then if anything, that's like its feature. Like, you know, if I wanted to, you know, loop something sort of like in a strict sense, you know, then you know what you can use, or you know how to sort of go about that, and you'd be using something that's very precise, I suppose. But what's then really incredible is having these like weird devices that break away from that, and it's just really interesting because again, it seems to break away from some of the things that we just learn, or we think that music is, you know, it's a structure, you know, and there's like rules, I suppose. There's certain rules that we.
What's happening there?
Sometimes the motor's just being weird,
Okay,
but it's trying to catch back itself.
It's leading me to another definition of art, which is a record of a perfect moment of chance.
Yeah, right.
There's obviously, you've got like some very free relationship with it.
Yeah,
in a sense of where you don't feel like you need to capture it.
Yeah, I think I've finally come around to like appreciating the unpredictable nature of it, you know, and then now trying to run with that, and then trying to somehow contain or document that to a level. And you know, it's interesting thinking about how when I was at art school, I was purposefully not documenting some works, and then, you know, then thinking about what that means and how that can exist in, you know, in the real sort of art world. And then now, you know, having these like moments of, say, unique, you know, musical, how would you say it, like sort of expression, and you know, these moments that certainly won't be able to be repeatable, you know, due to like the parameters. Then you weirdly and ironically, you need to then document it in order to at least have an archive, you know, be able to recall and remember it.
Have proof as well. Prove that there was some magic.
Yeah, and you know, again, because some of this stuff is unpredictable in a sense, and they, you know, you don't know what their lifespan is, then it's like, okay, well, at least maybe I've been able to like solidify it in a sense that it can be like retrieved. You know, it's like it's like a memory, but like, you know, for my sake, but also others, just to be like, okay, well, look, this can do this thing, and here's at least the one record of it, because it's kind of fleeting in a sense.
There's a cosmic mortality to it, in the sense of like there's all of this chaos and all of this waiting for the moment where you go, oh, that was beautiful. You know, there's this kind of meandering around in potential, in curiosity and intrigue, and then the potential and the outcome lines up into a moment where we both go, oh, whoa, shit, that was crazy. And if you stretch that's in a very small amount of time, but if you stretch that out into the limits of time, into the scope of the universe, you know, it kind of really reflects our position in time and space of where we're in this experience. And it's like, we're in that moment. We live in that moment day to day of, whoa. Well, everything has aligned perfectly to a point of where we get to look at it and be aware of its improbability and also its beauty. And no wonder we're compelled to grab a piece of paper, grab some paints, grab a recording device, not even grab, invent ways to keep them forever.
Exactly. You know what? I mean, it seems like such a good and simple analogy, right? Because in the way you just described it, like, it's true. It's like somehow I've tried to even subconsciously distill, like, our like existence, in a small, just scaled down so I can like see it. How weird, how crazy is that? It's mind blowing.
It's the same as that guy you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
You've essentially boiled the whole human experience down into this fucking language learning device, which is beautifully ironic in itself.
Exactly.
This tool of understanding. You've boiled the whole cosmos down into this little fucking contraption.
It's insane.
It is insane. It's beautiful. Congratulations. If I can sit here with absolutely no understanding of what it is that you've done and see our whole existence in it, you're doing something right. So fucking hats off to you, bro.
Thank you so much.
Teach me. That feels like a perfect place to sign off.
Oh, bro, yeah.
Thank you for coming and chatting to me, man. I really appreciate it.
It's been a treat, yeah.
I can't wait to have another conversation later down the line and
definitely.
see what it turns into.
That would be amazing.
Cool, bro.
Thanks.
Appreciate it, man.
Oh, wow. That was great, man.